Hello, and I'm delighted to be joined by composer Jérôme Leroy. Jérôme, hello.
Hi there.
How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
Great, thanks. Great, thanks. I just wanted to start by asking, what are your earliest memories of the Beatles?
So for me, I grew up in a fairly traditional family when it comes to musical tastes. My parents listened mostly to classical music and kind of like the standards of classical music. And that's kind of what we were supposed to listen to. That's what it's kind of what was proper, let's say. And they had a pretty extensive vinyl collection. I grew up in the 80s, so I started really listening to music in the late 80s, early 90s. So the CD started making its apparition, its appearance in the house. But I would listen mostly to vinyls, and one day I found this red and blue albums uh, from the Beatles, a band that I just didn't know, and I kind of started listening to it to see what it was, and at least that's my recollection. And at the I the three songs that I gravitated towards the most were and I'm not original when it comes to this, but it was Let It Be, Yesterday, and Hey Jude. And I think I was thinking about this the other day. Why those three songs out of the whole collection? What made those songs really kind of connect with me? And I think it's because from the coming from the traditional, from the classical sound of music, it's very much about melody, and repetition to a certain extent, but also in terms of instrumentation. I think those three songs, the piano, obviously with Yesterday, with the string quartet, I think they kind of had elements that I was familiar with, and at the same time going, pushing in a different direction a little bit. So that's the first recollection of the Beatles. Is just discovering it a little bit by chance in my parents' collection. And think about just the album cover, from a kid's point of view, where you see those young four chaps, and then what, 6 years or 7 or 10 years later, whatever it was, it didn't look like the cover of a classical album. So yeah, I think that's what it would be. Yeah.
And how do you rate Lennon and McCartney in the context of classical music and against all the great classical composers?
Oh goodness, that's a big question. I think can be a loaded question, but it's what's been interesting to me in retrospect, thinking about those three songs, and I discovered really the Beatles much later. I kind of went back to that. So what happened is, I'm going to answer your question in kind of like maybe a long-winded way, but
Okay.
so I listened to that album and kind of listened a few times, but eventually I was a teenager, so I listened to what was on radio at the time in the 90s, and film music was a big focus of mine. So that's kind of where I went, and I think maybe in my early 30s, I realized I really didn't know much about the Beatles. I knew those three songs that I just said, but I knew the big hits, if you will, but I didn't have a good overview of what the Beatles were. So I went back to those albums when they came out. Eventually, they came out on iTunes, and
Mhm.
which took a long time before they were able to get the rights. Apple was able to get the rights for it, and when they came out, I ended up buying them and listened everything in chronological order. And I discovered a world that was just mesmerizing because of its depth and the complexity of some of those songs. This isn't a pop band. The desire to push the envelope, to try new things, to explore different genres, to um, I mean, in terms of instrumentation, having a piccolo trumpet or having a massive orchestra, or so I think obviously, as Paul McCartney and John Lennon, of course, and George Harrison and Ringo Starr, because I think the first two, they're really true artists in the sense of they didn't want to stay still. They wanted to go where they hadn't gone before. So I think when it comes to, it's almost like it's not them versus the classic or within the classical world. It's more like them within the musical world. And they went in so many different directions. They tried so many different technologies, and I think it's inspiring when you listen to all of those songs, because you can hear what's common between all of them, but you can also hear what's and in a way what's common is that they're all trying. They're trying not to just stand still. And I think it's, as an artist myself, I think that's very inspiring.
And they weren't limited by any rules because they didn't actually know what the musical rules were supposed to be. So they had no constraints at all, really, in that regard.
Yeah, but you could think of many people who don't know the rules but end up kind of always kind of recycling and doing the same thing. And that's what's amazing is this willingness and this will to constantly try new things. I think, it's dangerous. There's a risk. There's inherent risk in trying something new, especially when you're so well known.
Hmm.
Um, so I think, to me, that really was the amazing thing, to discover that, completely, so many different ways of approaching a song.
So take me back to April 2022, and you get a telephone call from Ben Foster.
Yes, it was an email actually. So
Oh,
Ben and
email,
I
right.
go, yeah, Ben and I go back, about 10 years, I would say. We had worked on a project that I recorded at Abbey Road, and it was done remotely, so we needed a conductor, and he was recommended to us. He was wonderful, great to work with, wonderful conductor. And Ben Foster is also a really, really very talented composer and arranger.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm getting this email from Ben saying, listen, this is very hush hush, this is very confidential, but I'm flying into Los Angeles in 5 days for this recording session. I've arranged a strings chart for this one song, but I would conduct it normally, but I can't because it's happening so quickly that I don't have time to get a work visa to conduct it. So he asked me, would you be willing to conduct a session? And he said, I can't tell you too much, but it's for an iconic British artist. And it's being fairly ignorant. I didn't dwell on it for too much, but I'm just, well, who could this be? And I'm thinking maybe Elton John or Mick Jagger. I was trying to figure out who could that be. Um, but that was it. And so I said, of course, yes. Working with Ben, it's always, I had never worked with him in that capacity, so I felt that was really exciting. I love conducting. I love being in the studio, so that was very easy. My Sunday was available, so that was a very easy answer. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of how it started.
And the first time you actually knew it was Paul McCartney was when you sort of walked into Studio A and opened the door, and there he was chatting to Giles Martin, I believe.
That is correct. Yes, I had kind of forgotten in a way, or I who I was recording for wasn't really that important in a way. At a certain point, my job is to conduct. My job is to do a good job, during the session. So that's kind of what I was thinking more than anything. I almost had forgotten the question of who it was for when I walked in, and it's only when I saw the security at Capitol, filtering people in, that I remembered, oh, this is actually a session for an important artist. It wasn't out of the ordinary because I had recorded at Capitol before. I worked on the Academy Awards ceremony, and that's where they would do a lot of the pre-records and rehearsals. And so we would have, artists there. So this wasn't completely new to me, but that's when I realized that I didn't know who I was conducting for. I opened the door, to the mixing booth where the console is, and I see three people. One of them is turning their back on me, and then I see Giles Martin, who I'd known from another project, and Ben, and Ben says, and then the man turning his back on me, turns around, and that's when I realize it's Paul McCartney. Uh, and he sees me, he doesn't really, he's like, well, who is this? Because he didn't know me, obviously. And Ben says, oh, and here's Jerome, our conductor for the day. And so, Paul smiled and said, oh, hi, Jerome. And we fist bumped. Uh, and um, and uh, and that was the start of the session, which is pretty surreal, especially in retrospect.
Did that heighten your nerves at that stage, or did you just sort of carry on as normally, professionally as you would normally do?
I would say at that moment it didn't really made a massive difference, and I think part of it is there are a couple of things. One is I'm very much about the work, so and I think that's probably one of the reasons why Ben asked me is that I was raised in a way where my parents really didn't care. They never put people on a pedestal for
Mm.
for better or worse. They don't really have this thing about icons or about, and so it's I kind of was raised that way where what's important is to do your job and to do it well. Um, and when I moved to LA, obviously, you see celebrities fairly often in the street or in
Mm.
restaurants, or you go to movie premieres or you go to screenings and a director is there. I when I worked on the Academy Awards, I was backstage during the show, so you would have Steven Spielberg and George Lucas talking together, and
Mhm.
Tom Cruise and Natalie Portman, and so it's not I'm not jaded about it. It's more like it's kind of I know my place, and if I'm there, there's a reason why I'm there, and so I'm not going to bug them. I'm not going to ask for an autograph or picture, or I'm kind of stay. I'm kind of shy when it comes to this. So when I showed up and Paul McCartney is there, my first reaction is, "Oh, this is really cool," but I'm thinking, okay, I need to make sure I conduct well. That's really that's why I'm here. It's only later on during the session, at one point, Paul came out. He wanted to be on the stage and listen to the strings, directly. And so he's sitting down on his chair, and he's like by himself, sitting down on a chair and watching the strings and watching me, watching the strings, watching me. And at some point, I'm conducting. I'm like, this is crazy. I mean, it's like even my parents know who Paul McCartney is, so he's really important. And I listened to his voice singing when I was a kid, and I'm conducting for him. And I didn't even know it was for the Beatles at the time. The only thing I knew was I had heard the vocal. I had heard John's vocal. They explained to me that thanks to machine learning, they were able to isolate it from the piano. And But they didn't say it was going to be a Beatles recording. They didn't say. My understanding was it was going to be like an Easter egg or kind of like a bonus track, on some kind of re-release or something. I didn't realize. Now, now in retrospect, reading everything, going on the message boards, I realized that this demo had seen the light of day. That if you were a Beatles fan, you kind of I'd heard about it, and so I would have been able to um, you know, put two and two together. But at the time, it was just like, oh, I'm just doing something for Paul McCartney. And as I'm conducting, I had a kind of like this out of body experience because I'm like, the universe works in mysterious ways because I'm here 35 years later and Paul is watching me, and it's like some point I felt like this massive amount of pressure of you got to make sure that you know this is probably the most important 4/4 bar in your career. you know
I've noticed on the video that the sheet music has a heading "Lost and Found" instead of "Now and Then." I guess
yeah.
that was shielded from the string players. Did Paul tell you this was for Now and Then, or Giles, or
Nope,
Ben?
nope. I didn't know that. I didn't know the title of the song. I didn't know. I think we recorded in May. At the time, my understanding was that it was going to be released as part of. That's why my understanding was, and clearly I was mistaken. But it was going to be part of a release for around September or October. Like a box set or something like this. That's what I understood. I didn't understand they were going to. I think we had I believe we had some drums. I know we recorded to something. I can't remember what
Hmm.
it was, but the players didn't hear the vocal. In my headphones, I didn't. When I was conducting, we didn't have the vocal, so we must have had some kind of track. But I don't know. I can't remember how temporary that track was. I'm assuming some work was done after that on the rest of the instruments. But yes, the song, we didn't know the name of the song. And so really the job was to record that strings arrangement. And there was a lot of, some back and forth during the session, which was great. It was really comfortable because we had 3 hours for one song, which typically in 3 hours nowadays you can put 3 or 4 songs,
Hmm.
which meant that there was time for experimentation, writing new little bits if needed. So they were all very involved in that. Yeah.
And at what stage did you receive the strings charts?
The day of, the
Oh,
day of,
right.
yeah. Which which is not unheard of. I mean, for musicians and the conductor, if you're not involved on the creation of the chart itself, typically you see it, you just see it on the stand.
Oh,
You have to learn how to sight read, and that was kind of the concern in a way from my perspective was typically if I'm an orchestrator for a composer, I've orchestrated the charts, or if I'm an arranger, I've arranged the chart, so I know what it is. Being when you're just a conductor, they might send you the scores ahead of time, which is nice because it gives you a sense of, okay,
hmm.
you can look at them, you can find the passages are complicated, and you can make sure that you understand the way they work. And but oftentimes you just show up and here's the chart. So that's what happened that day.
And what instructions or direction did Paul give you, if any, on the day itself?
Um, it's a good question. I think if I can't really remember, but I would say most likely very little. And the reason why is because the track is playing, the chart in front of you is it's in 4/4 or whatever, but you have a click in your headphones, and your job as the conductor is really it's mainly twofold: one, follow the beat, and two, and cue the musicians. And when there's no track playing and they might be like, oh, for this section we'd like to hear this chord with that change, can you just have them play it without the
Hmm.
track? And in that case you cue them, make sure you have a nice sound, a nice tempo. But really you're mostly there not merely to follow along, but to kind of make sure the session is happening smoothly, that when they tell you, okay, we're ready to go, you make sure musicians are ready. So it's more of an efficiency, when you're just a conductor, it's more of an efficiency and just making sure everything is running smoothly, more than a creative, more than being part of the creative side of things, if you will.
I've seen the photo taken at the end of the session, and Paul looks quite happy. Did he give you the traditional Paul McCartney thumbs up?
Yeah, he did. He did. He was very happy. I mean, it was a great session. It was, as I said, comfortable. Obviously, everybody there, we didn't know it was for the Beatles, but we knew it was for Paul McCartney. And I think, for all of us, it's kind of like once in a lifetime type of situation. So we were also ecstatic that he was recording in the U.S. At Capitol. It's always great. It's not always done right. Like in general in the music industry, the music business, it's not always done right, especially nowadays. And the great thing about that chart is that it was a beautiful chart, and we had the time to do it right. They had the time to experiment. We had a really great group of people. So, those are the really nice sessions. Those are the sessions to remember.
Did they say why it was recorded at Capitol in LA rather than Abbey Road in London?
Um, that's a good question. I know they talk about it in the documentary. There's the documentary was released, and they
Hmm.
bring up why it was nice to record at Capitol because of the EMI connection. And but at the time, I don't know. I I'm going to say what I assumed. I wasn't told this, but I assume it's because he was in LA at that moment, and the charts was ready, and it kind of makes sense to just get it done.
Right.
because it happened. If I think about it, it happened very quickly, in the sense of Ben had to fly within 6 or 7 days. Okay, let's do the session on Sunday. So why at that point? It might also be because now at that point in the production process, it was time to get the strings done, before they spent more time doing the rest of the instruments. I'm not sure exactly. Um, I it's we certainly were very happy that we were chosen to do it.
You've spent your entire career, Jerome, composing and working in the movie industry, but never, I think, never before have you appeared in front of the camera. So, what was it like to appear in a Peter Jackson movie, albeit a 4-minute one?
Well, again, didn't know it was going to be Peter Jackson. They shot footage. So the footage being shot was not that surprising to me, because the behind the scenes stuff, you see that a lot. I mean, on the Academy Awards, for example, perfect example. And a lot of time it gets shot, but it's never used. That's happened a lot where I'm part of sessions, either being on the stand or being in the booth, as an orchestrator, and you have cameras there. And you'll never see it anywhere, because you got to have that willingness from the label or the studio to go back to the hours of footage and decide, oh, we're going to use this. So this was special in the sense that I was conducting, but also that they ended up using it. And so I think, I realized that, again, I wasn't told in advance. I learned the same time as everybody. I discovered the documentary at the same time as everybody. And when I saw that there was stuff from the recording session, it's at first it was in the documentary, so I was like, that's crazy. I mean, it's really great, to be not. It's great, obviously. It's good for the ego, I'd say, but mostly it was great that they showed the recording session. It's really nice when, because it's done right, and it's nice because it's almost like an example of, this is the way to do it. This is the proper way of doing it. And all the musicians being there. It's nice, kind of have that moment where we're all able to shine. But then I think the next day, people started texting me, and I started receiving messages, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're in the music video!" And maybe it was lost in translation, but I'm like, "Yeah, I know, I'm in the documentary," and it's like, "Man, it's just so incredible." And I'm like, "Okay," I kind of thought I knew what they were talking about, but then I watched the music video, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I'm actually in the music video too," um, and um, and that was crazy, because people started saying, Jerome, you're part of the Beatles history now. And you hear this and you think it's kind of like an exaggeration. It's like we're so it's so. I think we live in a society where we tend to just say, oh, everything is amazing, everything is crazy. And so my first reaction is like, it's not that big of a deal. And then when I watched the music video, I'm like, well, I watch music videos of artists, from songs like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And so, yeah, in some ways that music video is going to be out forever. So, and people will watch it in 20 years, most likely. So,
I,
yeah,
and in the video, you had a little bit of competition in your conducting duties from
yes.
John Lennon. How
Yes.
mad is that?
I thought it was actually really funny. I'm not gonna lie. The first reaction is, "Wow, they replaced me." But then, you're standing for CGI John Lennon, so it could be worse. That's actually, I thought it was really fun. And listen, I think the most important thing is the clip. The music video has to be good, in the same way as the song has to be good. And so that's kind of the way I've approached my career and the way I approached my place at the session, and in some ways in the music video as well, which is whatever makes sense. And I think the music video is really great. It's a beautiful homage, and at the same time, it's in keeping with the tradition in a way of the kind of this little bit of a silliness, of the band sometimes. And I'll defer to Peter Jackson. If he felt it was right to remove me, then he probably was right.
Well, I laughed and I cried at the same time when I watched the video. It's an
Yeah,
incredible piece of
yeah.
work, and totally suitable for the song as well. I thought it was absolutely amazing. So,
How how long just how long have you been the Beatles for you in your life? How much of a place? I mean, you have a channel, so I'm assuming it's a really big place in your life. But knowing that all that you know the history, how did the song impact you?
well, of course, for Beatles fans, it's not new because the demo tape or John's demo tape has been available for many years and it's been
Hmm.
up on YouTube for most of that time. So we've heard it before in its original format with the buzzy
Hmm.
electrical disturbance and very poor quality cassette recording. Um, but I think for me, the most striking thing was the making of the Now and Then film. When you hear halfway through the short film, you hear Lennon's isolated vocals in crystal clear clarity for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think everyone was sort of choking up at that stage because we hadn't heard it like that. And it's also quite a vulnerable voice, and also a voice. Lennon was quite. He didn't rate his voice very highly, which is strange considering he's one of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time. But he would hide his voice and disguise his voice with a lot of studio trickery towards the end of his time at the Beatles. So to hear
Yeah.
it in its purest form, that was truly amazing. And then, of course, we had another 24 hours to wait to see how is this going to be used? How is this going to be incorporated into Now and Then? What are they going to include? What are they going to leave out? They left out the bridge.
Hmm.
I don't want to lose you section, which takes the song into a totally different place. But I can understand why they did that. I mean, it's mainly written in a minor key, isn't it? But which is unusual because most of the Beatles songs are in major keys.
Ah.
So it's a very sad, melancholic
Hmm.
melody, which was sort of typical of what John was writing towards the end of the 70s. But it's so sad because it's a sense of loss, you know, especially the video made it even sadder when you can see them before, during, in 94, I think it was, when Paul, George, and Ringo were working on the song for a day. And obviously seeing Paul and Ringo now
Hmm.
towards the end of their lives. So it had a lot of nostalgia and a lot of regret, I think. But it's a great production. And I particularly enjoy the way that the three-part harmony vocals from Because are flown in just before the end,
Hmm.
because that makes it properly a Beatles song. But you didn't hear anything other. You didn't hear anything. You didn't hear the vocals or anything at all before during the your recording and
The
process at all.
vocal I heard, they played it for me
You heard the
before the
vocal only.
session. Yeah, they played the vocal by itself. But you know, within the context of the session, it's not like when I listen to it now, where um, it's all finished. When you hear it, you know, it's like, oh, let's listen to this vocal. You just hear the voice, and I think they told me, I could be wrong, but I seem to remember they said they were still working on it. So I don't think it had been completely finished by then. But they were so happy with the early results that they knew they would be able to get it. I think it's amazing, the clarity of that vocal. I mean, it's just really great. And I feel, you know, I don't have, obviously I don't have the same knowledge of the Beatles, but it took me a few days before I listened to the song really, because there's this the problem when you're involved in a piece of you know, in something that basically goes global, you know, is global, right? Is
Mm.
that it's hard for me to really focus on the music, on the work, because you hear all those people like, oh my god, this is amazing, this is incredible, and which is really nice, you know, you feel very
Mm.
good, but it's hard to be honest, I'd say, or to really think about what do I think about this piece of music. And so I waited, I think, 4 or 5 days before I listened to the song. I had seen obviously the little moments where I'm conducting, and I had seen all this, but I wasn't ready to listen to the song. I kind of wanted to have the mental space, the emotional space for it. And I really felt, I felt what was beautiful about it is how you can interpret the lyrics in so many different ways.
Yes.
And which I think is not always, but very often that's the sign of a good song. Of course, it can be a song about love or romantic relationship, but it can also be a song about friendships, about family, and it can be about members of a band. And I think in some ways, you know, what's beautiful also about the song is that, um, at least from my knowledge, out of the four Beatles, maybe Paul is the one that, you know, felt the loss more than the other three of that band and that friendship in a way. Um, and um, and so what's beautiful about it is that the song to me is, I felt when I was working on it and working with Paul a little bit, obviously for just a few hours, but I felt this desire to do something right, to do something beautiful, to do something that was meaningful, to be
Mm-hmm.
respectful of the past, but also to embrace technology in the same way as the Beatles had embraced technology. Um, and um, and so it's kind of like it just feels right. It's nice with that being part of something. You know, I always have, I always feel like it's we have a tendency in media and in production to kind of always go back to the past and get some stuff from the past and not necessarily treat it with respect just because we know it's going to sell well or because we know we're going to make a ton of money with it. And so I think it's dangerous. There's my, as an artist, I think always mining the past can be
Mm-hmm.
dangerous. But this, you know, it's something that um, truly he wrote, he recorded. It's something that hadn't been completely done, so it's not a new version of something that had been already fully done. It's something that wasn't completely full fleshed. So there's a part of artistry in bringing something new to it. Um, and it was done obviously with people, you know, Giles, who knows the Beatles legacy very well, but it's everything felt like it was done right, and it's nice to be a part of that. And so listening to it, I think there was a lot of different emotions coming, which is what a great bookend to an amazing story, you know. And of course, the surprise in a way, that's what I love about surprises like this. I'm very happy I didn't know it was coming out because it's a beautiful surprise, I think.
And at the end of the 3 hour recording session, did Paul stay behind and talk to you and the other
Yeah,
musicians involved?
yeah, and talk, that was another out of body moment for me because, you know, when the session, I think we, if I remember correctly, we ended up a little bit early. I think we might have ended up half an hour early, which is not surprising with just one song to record. And then we were all kind of chatting and all being very happy about a good day of work. And At some point, you know, we were chatting. I don't know, Giles, I think, was here, and Ben, and you know, we were in the room chatting, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. This is Paul McCartney talking to me like I'm a normal person, and I am a normal
Well, you
person,
are.
but like he is a normal person, let's say,
Yeah, well, he is too.
um, and he is too, and um, I've had the chance to meet a lot of different artists, and I've been amazed at some, you know, sometimes the biggest artists are actually the most normal human beings. And Barbara Streisand come to mind. You know, when I met her, I had heard so many stories, and when I met her at a recording session, I was there, and she comes to me and say, "Hi, I'm Barbara," and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, I know who you are. But she was just being very nice, you know, just wanted to know who I was and what my, you know, so it's, you know, Celine Dion is the same thing. She's just this very down to earth person. So I think we tend to put those icons, you know, very very high. But when you meet them in this environment where they feel comfortable, it really ends up being. It's all about the music, really. He had a great time. He was able to get what he wanted, and then you're just chatting at the end. And in my brain, I'm thinking this guy is like, you know, probably the biggest example of the global superstar. And that's one thing I realized this past few weeks, you know, with the reach of the Beatles. It's across generations, it's across borders, it's across cultures, and like it's just really insane. And here I was with Paul, in the session, like just doing my job and him doing his job, which is beautiful, I think.
Do you remember any stories or anecdotes that Paul mentioned at the end?
No, and I think the I think one is I don't have that good of a memory. That's the first thing. But the other thing is I think I got so self-conscious that I stopped listening. I was in my head thinking how the universe works and how crazy I'm just like part of the band, part of the group, like it's completely normal, but it's not. It's crazy. So I kind of yeah I can't I don't remember what he was talking about at that moment. No.
It's a nice way to end as well, because you began by talking about the Red and the Blue albums being
Mhm.
your sort of first entry into the world of the Beatles, and now you've got a small part on the Blue album. So now and
Yeah.
then is the last track
Yeah.
on the last side of the Blue album. So now
Mhm.
your place in history is assured. So how does that feel?
Well, I did buy the new edition. I never had it. My parents had it. Obviously, I had it in digital form, but it's just not the same. And I felt this was a very good way of remembering how. Listen, I'm lucky. I mean, it's. I told Ben this after the fact. I said, "Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this, because it's a tiny, tiny part of it. I mean, really, it's not being humble. It's I didn't. It's I didn't write the chart. I don't sing on the chart. I perform, but I'm not the one that you hear. You don't hear me performing. So it really is a tiny part of it. But those are moments in life, that are defining in a way. You'll always remember that. And so being able to, even for me in a way, being able to kind of close that chapter of something I discovered when I was 7 or 8 or 9, and now buying a copy of it, my copy of it, and there's a song in there that I worked on. Um, it feels like a bookend in a way. I'm still here, but it feels like a cycle that's complete. So yeah, I'm happy about that. I'm joyful about it because it's such it's we I think a lot of us in the industry, music industry or film industry, we tend to forget how lucky we are, because we just do the work and when I go to Abbey Road and I record at Abbey Road, it's in some ways it is like going to the office. I've been there so many times now that I know my way. I know what I'm there to do. There's a logic why I'm there. Um, but you come in at Abbey Road and you see people signing on the wall, and you see people taking pictures on the crosswalk,
Mm.
and they look at you coming in. They can't go in, and they look at you coming in, and they have stars in their eyes, and you got to remember that. It's this is a privilege, and so for me, being part of this is it's almost like a physical representation of how lucky I am, to be in this business and to be a part of this, I think.
Jérôme, thank you very much for sharing your memories and your role in Now and Then. Thanks very much.
You're
Take
very
care.
welcome. Thank you for having me.